And while in Montana, besides following the dinosaur trail to unearth fossils, John Stevens retraces the path of Lewis and Clark and digs up a piece of American history in the process. And finally, we'll uncover some buried secrets that lay hidden beneath the earth of an historic ghost town called Bannack. But we begin our exploration in the planetary ghost town left to us by the dinosaurs. This is called One Day 80 Million Years Ago. It's one of several permanent exhibits here at the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman, Montana. It's ground zero for a modern-day Jurassic Park and our jumping off point to perhaps find some dinosaur fossils of our own, if we're lucky.
Dinosaurs lived for 140 million years. They were successful, the most successful land animal on Earth for 140 million years. And yet, one of the biggest questions we have is what happened to them. A lot of people think it was a meteor, comets. I mean, they come up with all sorts of extraterrestrial causes. There's no data for any of them. I mean, there's no solid data for any of those things, even the comet, I mean, or the meteor. Even though it may have happened, there's no evidence that it killed a dinosaur. There actually weren't any dinosaurs at that particular time, as far as we know. Our hypothesis should be that dinosaurs were extinct before the catastrophic event at the end of the Cretaceous, because that's falsifiable. We could find a dinosaur at the KT boundary if they existed.
Horner has always bucked mainstream paleontology. His belief that dinosaurs, unlike modern reptiles, cared for their young in nests was evidenced by his 1982 find of a duck-billed dinosaur bed containing over 10,000 fossils. But it was much earlier, when he met a shop owner named Marion Brandvold, that he first came up with the hypothesis. Marion had asked him to identify something she'd stumbled upon in her own backyard.
We looked around her shop and identified all the other dinosaur bones in there, and as we were leaving, she said, "Oh, by the way, I have some little bones. Do you know what they are?" And she handed me two bones. One was the upper end of a thigh bone, one was just a rib fragment, and what she handed me were baby bones.
There's a little cast of the baby bones, or some of the baby bones, that I found in 1978. And if you ask me one bone from another, even I've been into it many, many years, they come and go and say, this is an ulna, this is a rib, this is a what? And I say, what is it?
What Marion Brandvold had found was actually a nest of baby dinosaurs. It changed the way people think about dinosaurs. I mean, all of a sudden we knew that dinosaurs cared for their young. We knew that dinosaurs nested in colonies. We know that dinosaurs put a lot of effort into actually building a nest and caring for the eggs during incubation and the babies after incubation.
Marion's son, paleontologist Dave Trexler, took us out to his site in a geological area known as the Two Medicine Formation. Montana and the land stretching to its north and south is where many of the dinosaurs celebrated in popular culture lived, and it was here that we hope to make some discoveries of our own. So this is the dig site.
Yes, this is our current quarry. As you can see, this is a bare area here. We cleaned this whole surface off. It took us like 2 years to get up to where we're working at the moment. And you can see we have in place dinosaur bone here. This is actually the ilium, or the upper pelvis bone from a tyrannosaur dinosaur.
And how can you tell this is the pelvis bone?
Well, it's very distinctive. There's not very many bones that look like that. You look at this picture here. This is T-Rex. You can see this is the ilium right here.
Okay.
And it looks almost exactly like what we've got there. This hook is actually what Nate is working on that upper corner. And this big long piece on the back is what we're seeing right here. And we keep running into more and more pieces. This particular tooth has been hardened and is now ready to be removed so that we can continue our trench. And If you look at it, this is the gum line right here. All of this was in the jaw. You see this hole right here?
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a cavity.
Oh my goodness.
There's no cavities on this side. Very few people ever get a chance to see a complete tyrannosaurid tooth with the root attached.
Once the bones have been exposed, they're carefully excavated and placed in plaster casts or jackets for transport back to the lab. Like Dave and Jack, Nate Murphy also offers programs whereby the amateur can work both out in the field and in the preparatory lab.
But really, this is where it happens. Once the material gets back to the museum preparatory lab, the excavation is just a minuscule part of getting from point A to point B, and that is a displayable specimen for the collections. This is a cervical vertebrae off of a duck-billed dinosaur, and you can see the hole here is for the spinal cord.
Ah, but no hole on the other side.
That's right, and that's where you come in.
While I've found the work of preparing a fossil for display great fun, professionals know it can be long and arduous. And because it's important that only the dirt and debris are removed, the various instruments used are extremely gentle. The device we see here uses a stream of cool air and baking soda to clean away whatever particles of earth and plaster still remain.
Notice the two eye openings here, how his eyes are facing forward. T-Rex, if you can imagine softball-sized eyeballs in those openings looking straight at you. Now what this feature is another fact to give you an idea of how effective a predator he could have been. That's the Rex biscuit. This is a Triceratops femur, and it has over 100 bite marks from Tyrannosaurus rex in it. In fact, you can see where it bit clear through. It's a fossil or a record of the living action of the animal.
Oh, yum, yum. Bon appetit.
Just as today's dinosaur detectives like Jack, Dave, and Nate search out this area in hopes of finding fossils, back in 1803, a group of men began exploring these parts, expecting to find a direct water route to the Pacific. Although no Northwest Passage existed, Lewis and Clark did map out this vast, then unknown region of the West, and in retracing their path, John Stevens discovers that sometimes it's the journey that matters, not the destination.
When Lewis and Clark finally made it to the headwaters of the Missouri River, what they found was the confluence of three rivers, which they named the Madison, the Gallatin, and the Jefferson after then-President Thomas Jefferson. And it was the Jefferson River that they chose to continue following to find the great Northwest Passage. In 1804, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark led the first U.S. expedition across the continent, inspiring an entire nation. Imagine being sent, carrying the destiny of a country as well as its flag, into a vast, unexplored, unmapped land. The single best way to experience what Lewis and Clark saw on their epic journey is here, on Montana's Missouri River. The expedition spent months in planning, but did they really know what to expect? Ella May Howard, Lewis and Clark expert and Montana author, knows much of the expedition and its experiences in this part of the country.
With Lewis and Clark in Montana, when they left Fort Mandan, they were really going into unknown territory. Up until that point, they had a map and they had talked to people in St. Louis about what they were going to see up until Fort Mandan. But once they leave the Fort Mandan and they cross that 49th parallel and go into what is now Montana, it was really unknown country.
This section of the Missouri, outside Great Falls, is easy paddling, but their journey was not so idyllic. Along the way, they had to contend with the unforgiving forces of Mother Nature, extreme weather, incredible distances, forcing dugout canoes upstream against impossible currents for days on end. And then there were the falls. The Corps of Discovery came upon a series of 5 waterfalls instead of the one Great Falls about which they had been told by the Mandan Indians during their winter stay in the Dakotas. The party spent nearly a month here, portaging heavy canoes and supplies around the falls. This is Lower Portage Camp, located a few miles downstream from the Great Falls of the Missouri, near what the Corps called Portage Creek. The expedition used this site as a base camp from which they carried supplies 18 miles across the prairies to the Upper Portage Camp. There's been an ongoing archaeological dig at this campsite for several years, with a goal of scientifically proving the exact location of the camp. Ken Karzmizki, Associate Curator of the Museum of the Rockies at Montana State University, Bozeman, has spent the last 10 years searching and digging. Though he has dig sites in 6 separate locations along the Lewis and Clark Trail, Lower Portage Camp is his main pursuit.
What we're doing is we're trying to take the next step in terms of research on Lewis and Clark. Scholars have dealt with the journals now for almost 200 years, almost since the Lewis and Clark expedition came back. What we're trying to do is use archaeology to see if we can't come up with physical evidence of the Lewis and Clark expedition. A group of people, 33 people, who were out for a total of 863 days. And in the course of that 863 days, they made roughly 600 camps. They're strung like pearls on a thread all the way from St. Louis to the Pacific Ocean and back. The problem is, in terms of the archaeological pursuit, most of those 600 camps were used for 12 hours or less. And the evidence that they could leave, what they would leave behind in a camp used for 12 hours, is really pretty minute. What we have here is one of 3 fires that we've found in this area. The interesting thing is that each of the fires is about 50 feet away from the other, and that at one of these fires, if not more, they're butchering. One fire may be the main butchering site, but every one is a fire for cooking. And what we found here is a vertebrae. This would be the backbone of a bison. But the interesting thing is that this V shape right in here is because someone took a hatchet and just whacked it. They were trying probably to split and hit between the vertebrae, but they ended up hitting right there. And we can still see the notch right there. And the impact blew a piece of bone out here and on the bottom side. The nice thing about this is bone you can radiocarbon date. It'll be a nice piece of information, not only because we can date it, but because it's been modified. Somebody hit it with a hatchet, and that's beautiful.
After portaging around the Great Falls, the Lewis and Clark expedition team returned to the Missouri River, and the currents were even more wicked than before. They used ropes made of hemp and leather and long wooden poles to help ascend those currents. On July 19th, Meriwether Lewis's journal refers to the most remarkable cliffs they had yet seen. Lewis called this the Gates of the Rocky Mountains. Today, Gates of the Mountain Boat Tours offers us the chance to see what Lewis and Clark saw.
That is a turkey vulture.
Yep, vulture. Travis is 12 years old and his family operates the Gates of the Mountain Boat Tours, so he's grown up on this river. This canyon holds many secrets, and Travis agreed to show us one. Deep within this canyon, and accessible only by boat due to the steep cliffs that line this section of the Missouri River, are these petroglyphs, or Indian rock paintings. Still visible is this buffalo facing downwards, which represents a buffalo jump. That was where Indians would force a herd of buffalo over a cliff as a technique for hunting. There was an eye, which is no longer visible. It's faded away, but that told the viewer to look across the river for the buffalo jump. And there's this inverted man, which represents death. We don't know what this whole rock painting signified. Perhaps it was part of Indian tradition of storytelling and folklore. Perhaps it was for religious purposes. Or maybe it was a warning of the dangers inherent in this canyon. I wondered if Travis would leave here one day.
I hope that when I grow up that I will be able or at least have the chance to manage the gates. I've lived here my whole entire life and I can't really picture myself anywhere else. It's such a neat place. It's so beautiful, yet it's so quiet that I just have grown to love it. It's my home.
Three Forks was an important area for Plains Indians following bison herds. The bison are gone now, but the area is rich in history. Ken Sine of Northern Rockies Natural History Tours is taking us down the Jefferson River.
Right now we're at the junction of the three rivers, the Gallatin, the Madison, and the Jefferson. Of course, this is the location, the headwaters of the Missouri, and that's essentially what Lewis and Clark were sent out to find. The region is a wealth of natural and cultural resources.
This is Trail Creek, which Meriwether Lewis followed until it became this small. He must have known he was getting close to the Continental Divide. This is Lemhi Pass. It was here that the expedition hoped to find the Northwest Passage. Failure here would put them in peril as winter was approaching. You've helped us retrace the steps of Meriwether Lewis up to this Continental Divide. What was it that he was expecting here?
He was expecting to see a half-day portage, a place where they could travel another half day and then get back in the water with canoes and go on down to the Columbia.
Historian Dale Hedman imagines how they felt.
He found miles and miles of mountains out in front of him.
At this moment, in their minds, the expedition had failed.
It's getting late in the season. He still hadn't obtained any horses, and he was becoming very worried about getting across the mountains before winter set in. It must have been a very emotional thing for him, but I'm sure he was disappointed, because if he expected the descent on the other side to be like the ascent on this side, he would be very disappointed. He still had an awful long journey ahead of him. This is a military expedition. They were under orders to find the best way to the Pacific. But when he saw all those mountains there, of course, that was the end of a dream. He knew then that there was no Northwest Passage.
They had traveled thousands of miles to find the Northwest Passage, and upon reaching that summit, they realized it didn't even exist. But it didn't stop them. They were undaunted. It teaches that success is not only measured by the results of our achievements, but by our commitment to the experience itself. Life is not a destination, it's a journey. And we hope that your journey continues on Earth Trek.
About 60 years after Lewis and Clark mapped out this area, the gold rush was on, and mining camps sprung up all over western Montana. Today, these places are cultural gold mines. This is Montana's ghost town of Bannack. In 1863, gold was discovered here, flooding this town with miners, businessmen, dance hall girls, and murderers. In fact, in 1 year, over 100 residents were killed, and you'll never believe who did it. But some say that you can hear the voices of his murdered victims crying out from their grave to this very day.
Some of the buildings do have reputations for housing people that have died in them, and people go into these buildings and come out with a feel that there's been something violent. I've had people tell me that something violent has happened in this building, and they quiz me a lot if I know any of the history about the buildings, because they've gotten some real strange vibrations.
Tell me about the house where the children were.
We call that the Bassett House, I believe, and the woman took in children. It was around the turn of the century, I believe, the early 1900s, and there was an epidemic going through Bannack, and she took the children in, and a lot of them died in the building there, and people claim that they hear children crying when they walk in and around that building. That's one of them that I've had people comment on, that they've gone into and had some weird vibes that something bad has happened in that building. Motel is also one that there's supposedly a little girl in blue that people have seen walking down the stairs, that she supposedly drowned in a creek.
Oh, I didn't like that. There's something very creepy about walking through there.
This is the spookiest building in town, I think.
But one year Bannack would lose its citizens to something far more nefarious than plagues or accidents. In 1863, over 100 innocent victims were murdered. The people looked first to God for help, and then they went to local authorities.
Like most towns, Bannack had a sheriff. His name was Henry Plummer. He was a handsome, smooth-talking man from California who made his office right here next to the jails. The people looked to Henry to find out who it was committing these heinous crimes, not knowing that Henry Plummer was the murderer.
The history of Bannack starts around 1863 when they first discovered gold in town, in the area, and along with this came the Sheriff Henry Plummer. And he was a sheriff by day and an outlaw by night, the story goes. It's thought that him and his band of innocents, as they were called, murdered over 100 people and robbed them as they were coming and going from Bannack to various other parts in the state. And on January 10th, 1864, he was hanged without a trial, him and two of his deputies, here in Bannack in a gallows that he built for a horse thief.
In direct contrast to Henry Plummer, Montana's history tells us of a noble and generous man by the name of William Allen. Allen provided countless jobs for the local people through the creation of another of Montana's early mining towns, Coolidge. Named after the president, Coolidge is nestled deep in the Pioneer Mountains and is accessible only by snowmobile in the winter months. Our guide is Russ Kipp, owner of Montana High Country Tours just outside of Dillon, Montana.
Okay, Coolidge sets in behind Comet Mountain and at the base of Saddleback, and that's where we're going to head in.
The dream child of philanthropist William Allen, Coolidge was created to serve as a base camp in the 1920s for miners working the nearby Elkhorn silver mine. Part of this site's mystique comes from its sheer size and from the incredible speed of its failure. Good ore was mixed in with low-grade ore. Unfortunately, they never found enough good ore to sustain it. It was that and a bit of bad luck. The Montana Power Dam washed out, removing 12 miles of train track. It took the men 3 years to rebuild. By the time the railroad was completed, the Depression had set in. Over the past 20 years or so, scavengers have torn apart some of the structure for the lumber. With no formal plan of preservation, Coolidge could easily disappear within this decade. And what will become of its ghosts? Who knows?
I care not of the place of your birth, nor the land from whence you came. I care not of your share of the earth, nor the long ancestry of your name. I care not of your looks, nor your clothes, or if from mine, farm, or mart. I care only for the simple goodness that flows to humanity from the depths of your heart.
As the sun began to set over the Pioneer Mountains William Allen called home, the words of another formidable man stirred in my head. In 1961, John Steinbeck wrote, "I am in love with Montana. For other states I have admiration, respect, recognition, and even some affection. But with Montana it is love, and it's difficult to analyze love when you're in it."
Well, that's about going to do it for us. We sure hope you had a good time. As you can see, if you're looking for exploration, discovery, conservation, Montana's a good place to start. For Earth Trek, this is Joni Ravenna saying so long until next time.
Funded in part by a grant from the David Lynch Foundation for Consciousness-Based Education and World Peace. On the web at davidlynchfoundation.org.
Deep in the beautiful and mystical Yunnan region lies part of the ancient Silk Road. Chef Martin Yan journeys there to bring us the unique cultural treasures of Western China and meet some of the native ethnic peoples who share their way of life and their cuisine. It's all right here on Martin Yan's Hidden China.
Coming up next.
Hi, I'm Mark Wahlberg, and have I got some quirky finds for you?
Well, we're not really sure what to call it.
I don't think I'd want to meet him in a dark alley, but as a Weller piece, he's quite a rarity.
I must say, I've never seen anything like it.
There's like one of 4 known in America. You have one of them.
Get out of here!
Don't miss our special edition of Antiques Roadshow, Unique Antiques.